Okay, now we're going to move into radical equations. So it looks kind of like the opposite of quadratics, but there are 3 steps for solving a radical equation. The first step is to isolate the radical. Okay, then we solve for x, and then we're going to check for what we call extraneous solutions. So we're just going to start, right, extraneous solutions. We're just going to start, and we're going to kind of talk our way through it. All right, so for example, here's a very basic one. If I want to cancel out this square root, right, to solve for x, the opposite of square rooting is squaring. And as long as I do it to both sides, I don't change anything. So I end up with x equals 100. All right. So that's the gist. Before we can square, though, we have to make sure we get that radical by itself. Okay, so for our first one, right, the radical is by itself. There's nothing else outside the radical on this side. So the first thing we're going to do is square both sides. So the square root of x minus 4 squared is just x minus 4. 3 squared is 9. Add 4 to both sides, and we get x equals 13. To check for extraneous solutions, these are solutions that show up algebraically but not graphically, right? So to check, all we do is plug back in, which we should be doing anyway so that we can check our work. So if I plug in 13, let me show that we're doing this. We have 13 minus 4 should equal 3. 13 minus 4 is 9. And then the square root of 9 is 3. So we get the right answer. Now, when we're solving radical equations, we only use the positive roots, okay? Because we're not getting into this. We're kind of skipping over this part. But my shape of a square root graph is what we call a swimmer's arm. And it looks like a sideways parabola, right? If you imagine the rest of the parabola coming down. But we don't include the negatives, right? Our square root function only includes the positives. So when we take our square roots here, we're plugging back in. Only use the positive roots. Okay, for the second one, before I can square both sides, I need to get rid of this 6 that's on the outside, or the negative 6. And I do that by dividing, because it's negative 6 times the square root. So I'm going to divide. Negative 12 divided by negative 6 is a 2. Now I can square both sides. So we get 4 equals x plus 4. Subtract 4, and we get x equals 0. Always double check. So we've got negative 12 should equal negative 6 times 0 plus 4. Okay, 0 plus 4 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2. So negative 6 times 2 equals negative 12. So it works. Got to double check. Okay, now the next one looks a little crazy because I got x's on both sides, but my rules still stay the same. My radical is by itself. So I'm going to square both sides to get rid of the radical. So I'm going to have 12 minus x equals, and then that's just going to be x squared. Right? Well, now I have a quadratic. To solve my quadratic, I need to set it equal to 0. I'm going to leave my x squared over here just because it's positive. You could move it over, but I'm going to leave it here so that I have a positive x squared. So then I'm going to add the x and subtract the 12. Right? I can solve by factoring, graphing, quadratic formula, completing the square, right? This one I'm going to factor because it's plain Jane. It's pretty quick. But any of those methods would work. So I want to multiply a negative 12 but add to 1. So that's going to be a positive 4 and a negative 3. Remember, we change our sign. So I get x equals negative 4, x equals 3. Got to check both solutions, right? So if I go back to my original problem, right, 12 minus negative 4 has to equal negative 4. Okay, and 12 minus 3 has to equal 3, or the square root of 12 minus 3 has to equal 3. Okay, so 12 minus negative becomes plus. 12 plus 4 is 16. Okay, and remember, when we do our radical equations, we're only working with the positive root. So the square root of 16, we're saying is positive 4, and that does not equal negative 4. So that means that negative 4 is not an answer. That's extraneous. Okay, whenever you do that, that's usually what they end up looking like, where it looks like it's true, but remember, we only take the positive. Okay, 12 minus 3 is 9. Square root of 9 is 3, so that one works. So this 3 ends up being my only solution. All right, and then one more. Okay, just like that one, I can go ahead and square both sides. So I have negative 16 plus 10x equals x squared. And I'm going to move those to the right side so that I can set it equal to 0. So I have x squared minus 10x plus 16. And again, we get plain Jane, so it's going to be a little easier to factor. I want to multiply to a positive 16, but add to a negative 10. So it's going to be negative 2 and negative 8. So my answers are 8 and 2. Okay, got to double check, make sure we don't have an extraneous solution. So I've got negative 16 plus 10 times 8. When I square root it has to give me 8. And then we've got, paper's folding up. Then I've got the square root of negative 16 plus 10 times 2 has to give me 2. Okay, 10 times 8 is 80. Oops. All right, negative 16 plus 80 is going to give me a positive 64. Square root of 64 is 8, so that one works. Okay, 10 times 2 is 20. Negative 16 plus 20 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2, so that one works. So in this case, both answers work. So over here, only one works. Here, both work. Sometimes neither one of them will work. Sometimes it's no solution. It just depends when you plug it back in what happens.